A king who conquered empires, a ruler who took Babylon, a man history calls the Great, Cyrus of Persia. He had never lost a war, but then he marched east, and he never came back, not defeated by another empire, not stopped by walls or rivers, but by a queen of the open steppe. Her name was Tomyris, and according to the oldest surviving account, she didn't just defeat him, she made sure the most powerful man in Asia would answer for it in blood. To understand Tomyris, you have to leave the world of cities. No walls, no palaces, no fixed borders, only grass, sky, and land that never ends. The Eurasian steppe. This was the domain of the Massagetae, a powerful nomadic confederation. Ancient writers like Herodotus placed them east of the Araxes River, toward the rising sun. They were an Iranian-speaking people, related to the Scythians and the Saka. But what set them apart from empires like Persia was how they lived. They lived on horseback. They fought with compound bows, lances, and their favored weapon, the battle axe. They did not defend cities. They were the battlefield. They drank fermented mare's milk instead of wine. They worshipped the sun, and, according to ancient accounts, offered the fastest animal they knew, the horse, to the fastest god. Their weapons were not made of iron, because iron was rare in their lands. Instead, they used brass for spear points, arrowheads, and axes, and gold for ornaments, belts, and horse harness, not because they were primitive, but because those were the metals their world provided. This was not a kingdom. This was a mobile warrior society, and empires like Persia, they were not just outsiders. They were unpredictable, dangerous, and uncontrollable. Welcome to Her Time Unfolded, where the sources lead and the myths step aside. Today, Tomyris, her time, begins now. Stood a queen, Tomyris. We know very little about her early life, no confirmed birthplace, no recorded childhood. Later traditions place her somewhere in the 6th century BC in the lands east of the Caspian Sea. But those details remain uncertain. What we do know comes from a handful of ancient writers, Strabo, Polyaenus, and others, who mention her briefly. But only one source tells the full story, Herodotus, writing about a century after the events. According to him, Tomyris was married to the king of the Massagetae. His name is lost to history. When he died, she did not step aside. She took power, not as a regent, not as a placeholder, but as sovereign. She ruled in her own name, commanded armies, directed policy, held authority in a world where power was not inherited, but proven. She had a son, Spargapizes, a name like hers rooted in the Iranian world. He would soon stand beside her in a conflict that would bring Persia to the edge of the steppe. This was her world, unbounded, unforgiving, and she was ready to defend it. Far to the west, Cyrus of Persia was building something the world had never seen. He had overthrown the Medes, defeated the Lydians, conquered Babylon, the greatest city of its age. He had created the Achaemenid Empire, the largest imperial power the world had yet known. To later generations, he would be remembered as a lawgiver, a founder, a king of unusual stature. But empires have a habit of creating their own dangers. The further Cyrus expanded, the more vulnerable his frontiers became. And the east, the steppe, the Massagetae, were unfinished business. According to one ancient tradition, before moving against Egypt, Cyrus first chose to secure Persia's eastern border. The nomads beyond the Araxes were not a distant curiosity. They were a real military problem, and Cyrus decided to solve it. Cyrus did not begin with war. He began with strategy. Marriage. He sent ambassadors to Tomyris, pretending he wished to take her as his wife. This was not romance. This was annexation in ceremonial clothing. If she accepted, her kingdom would become his, without a single battle. But Tomyris saw through it immediately. Herodotus tells us she forbade the envoys to approach. She knew it was her kingdom he wanted, not her. No alliance, no submission, only independence. That one exchange reveals both rulers with startling clarity. Cyrus acts like an empire. Tomyris answers like a sovereign. Once diplomacy failed, there would be war. Cyrus marched east. He reached the Araxes River, the traditional frontier, and began building a bridge to cross. Tomyris did not panic. She sent him a message. And this is one of the most remarkable moments in ancient history. She told Cyrus, "Stop. Rule your own kingdom. Let us rule ours." But if he insisted on battle, she offered him a choice. Either the Massagetae would withdraw 3 days' march from the river, allowing him to cross and fight on their land, or he could withdraw the same distance and fight on Persian ground. This is extraordinary. She is not begging for peace. She is not reacting in fear. She is shaping the battlefield and offering him an honorable exit. Cyrus consulted his advisors. Most favored letting Tomyris cross, fighting on Persian ground. But one man objected. Croesus, the defeated king of Lydia, now attached to Cyrus's court. Croesus advised the opposite. If Cyrus lets the Massagetae enter Persia and loses, he risks everything. But if he crosses and wins, he can push into enemy territory. And then Croesus proposed the strategy that would change everything. Advance into their land, prepare a magnificent feast, leave behind weaker troops, withdraw, and let the Massagetae be undone by pleasures they do not know. Cyrus accepted. He told Tomyris to withdraw. Then he crossed the river. After the crossing, Herodotus adds an eerie detail. That first night in enemy country, Cyrus dreamed that the son of a Persian noble stood with wings, shadowing Asia and Europe. He misread the dream as a plot against his throne, but Herodotus tells us the real meaning. The dream foreshadowed Cyrus's own death. The campaign was already under a dark sign. Then Cyrus executed Croesus's plan. He left behind the weaker portion of his army in a well-stocked camp and withdrew with his best troops toward the river. Soon, a Massagetae detachment arrived, led by Spargapases, Tomyris' son, commanding 1/3 of the entire Massagetae force. They attacked the Persian camp. They killed the troops left behind, and then they found the banquet: wine, food, luxury, the good things of Persian life. Here's what you need to understand. The Massagetae did not drink grape wine. Their intoxicants were fermented mare's milk and possibly cannabis. They were not used to wine. Herodotus says they feasted until they were drunk and fell asleep. Then the Persians returned. They slaughtered many and captured even more. Among the prisoners, Spargapases himself, 1/3 of Tomyris' army, destroyed not in open battle, but through deceit and intoxication. When Spargapases sobered and understood the scale of the disaster, he asked Cyrus to release him from his bonds. Cyrus granted the request, and the moment his hands were free, he killed himself. Not captivity, not humiliation, death. Some accounts say he fell on his own sword. Others say he used a weapon from the camp. But the meaning is the same. He chose to die rather than live as Persia's prisoner. And in that moment, the war changed forever. It was no longer a border conflict. It was no longer about territory or tribute. It was personal. When Tomyris learned what happened to her army and her son, she sent a herald to Cyrus, and her message is one of the coldest in ancient literature. "Bloodthirsty Cyrus," she said, "do not boast of this poor success. It was grape juice that ensnared my child. Not open fight. Restore my son and leave this land unharmed, triumphant over only a third part of the Massagetae. Refuse, and I swear by the sun, the sovereign lord of my people, bloodthirsty as you are, you will answer for this in blood." This message does several things at once. It rejects Cyrus's victory as dishonorable. It offers him one last chance to leave, and it transforms a mother's grief into a sacred oath. The sun itself is invoked as witness. Cyrus ignored the message. Now there could be no negotiated end. Only battle. Tomyris gathered all the forces of her kingdom, not 1/3, everything, and she gave battle. Herodotus says that of all the combats fought between non-Greek peoples, he considers this the fiercest. He even describes how it unfolded. First, the two armies stood apart and shot arrows at one another, wave after wave, the sky darkening with shafts. Then, when their quivers were empty, they closed, lances, daggers, battle axes, hand-to-hand fighting, neither side willing to give ground, a battle of endurance, rage, and refusal. This was not the polished image of Persian imperial victory. This was chaos in open country, and here, on her own ground, with everything at stake. The Massagetae were no longer drunk, no longer surprised, no longer divided. They were fighting together, under a queen with blood to answer for. At length, the Massagetae prevailed. The greater part of the Persian army was destroyed, and Cyrus himself fell after reigning 29 years. One of history's greatest empire builders lay dead beyond the frontier he sought to master. After the battle, Tomyris ordered a search among the slain for Cyrus's body. When it was found, she took a skin, filled it with human blood, and placed his head into a vessel filled with blood. Then she spoke, "I live and have conquered you in fight, and yet by you am I ruined. For you took my son with guile, but thus I make good my threat, and give you your fill of blood." That is the line that ensured Tomyris would never disappear from history. It is revenge, but not only revenge. It is judicial, threat answered, oath fulfilled, deceit answered with public humiliation. The most powerful man in Asia, forced to drink in death what he refused to hear in life. Now a responsible pause. Herodotus himself admits there were many accounts of Cyrus's death. He follows the one he finds most worthy of belief, but he acknowledges others existed. The Greek physician Ctesias, who worked in the Persian court, gave a different version. In his account, Cyrus was mortally wounded fighting a related people called the Derbices, with Indian allies involved. The famous wine trap narrative is absent or transformed. Other ancient writers like Strabo mention the Massagetae more as an ethnographic subject. So what can we say with confidence? This much is certain. Cyrus campaigned against the Massagetae. The campaign ended disastrously for Persia. Cyrus died in the east, and he did not conquer them. Whether every detail of the blood-filled skin happened exactly as Herodotus describes, the memory of it proves stronger than time. A queen of the steppe defeated a king of kings. That fact, no ancient writer disputes. What happened to Tomyris after the battle? The honest answer is, we don't know. She vanishes from the historical record. We don't know how long she ruled. We don't know how she died. We don't know what her people called her in her own language when no Greek was listening. By around 520 BCE, Perhaps 20 years later, the Massagetae appear under a ruler named Skunksa, who rebelled against Persia and was defeated by Darius I. So Tomyris wins her great victory, and then history closes over her. But that silence is part of her power, because Tomyris did not stay buried in ancient books. She survived in imagination. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, she entered the tradition of women who triumphed over powerful men. The poet Eustache Deschamps included her among the 9 female worthies. Shakespeare references her. Artists across centuries painted that final scene. Rubens, Allegrini, Luca Ferrari, Gustave Moreau, again and again. The Queen, the severed head, the vessel of blood. Why that scene? Because it condenses so much in a single image. Empire brought low, masculine conquest reversed, maternal grief weaponized, justice rendered in blood. In the modern world, her legacy widens further. An asteroid is named after her, 590 Tomyris. In Kazakhstan and across parts of Central Asia, she has been adopted as a cultural heroine, commemorated on coins, monuments, streets. Some modern narratives claim her as Turkic, while historical and linguistic evidence places the Massagetae within an Iranian cultural world. That tension is part of her afterlife. Legends are powerful because they are useful. History is powerful because it resists being simplified. Tomyris lives in the space between the two. Why does this story endure after 2,500 years? Because the inevitable failed. Cyrus was meant to win. He didn't. And the queen, who should have been forgotten, wasn't. She was remembered. Cyrus built an empire, but at its edge, he met a limit. Not an army, a queen. She warned him. He ignored it. She ended him. Her name was Tomyris. If you value source-based storytelling, like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment. It helps this history continue.